All right. So that verse is talking when it says you all already know that the confirmation, he confirming uh the covenant with many is talking about the Romans. It's not an individual. It's talking about the Roman uh uh the Roman how can we put it? Represent the Roman representatives that interfaced right with Israel from the time from the time of Judas Maccabees up until the destruction of the temple. And I said what we were going to do was read from book 7, but actually I want to actually start reading at book 6. But before we read at book 6, I want everyone to go to the beginning of the Wars of the Jews. And we're going to read the preface first. The preface it is imperative to read it because it sets the template right for why. Let me put it like this. The preface is necessary because first of all, Josephus outlines what his intentions are with the entire book that's called the Wars of the Jews. But more so than that, he gives you the tenure of why it had to be done, right? Israel, let's just read it. So it only consists, the first, the preface of Wars of the Jews, it's one chapter that consists of about 12 paragraphs, and Amayetazar and myself are going to bounce back and forth reading those paragraphs, but it gives you some insight on who we are today, who the Israelites, who the Negroites are today, right? So go ahead, Amayetazar, you take the first one and we'll alternate. Wars of the Jews, it says, or the history of the destruction of Jerusalem, preface. That's what we're reading now.
Paragraph 1. Whereas the war which the Jews made with the Romans have been the greatest of all those, not only that have been in our times, but in a manner of those that ever were heard of.
Now listen to what he's telling you. From the time of the war of Jerusalem on back to the dawn of time, there hadn't been a greater war than that took place between the Jews and the Romans. It's the worst war to have happened to any civilization. And the scriptures tell you that. The scriptures say under the whole heaven, it had not happened as it happened unto Jerusalem. Go ahead.
Both of those wherein cities have fought against cities, or nations against nations, while some men who are not concerned in the affairs themselves have gotten together vain and contradictory stories by hearsay, and have written them down after a sophistical manner.
In other words, he's saying that there are sources that can be found back then of the fall of Jerusalem, and that those sources are the result of people that weren't involved, that they got it by hearsay, and they just combined what they heard from other people and put it down in a sophisticated, when it says sophistical, he's talking about a sophisticated manner, which is talking about the eloquence of fine writing, but not factual. Go ahead.
And while those that were there present have given false accounts of things, and this either out of a humor of flattery to the Romans, or of hatred towards the Jews.
Now he's giving you all of these parties. So aside from those that weren't there to write about it based on hearsay, there were those that were there that also wrote about it, but they gave false accounts in order to flatter the Romans or for a hatred that they had for the Jews. In other words, another source of inaccurate account. Go ahead.
And sometimes, and while their writings contain sometimes accusations and sometimes encomiums, but nowhere the accurate truth of the facts. I have proposed to myself, for the sake of such as lived under the government of the Romans, to translate those books into the Greek tongue, which I formerly composed in the language of our country and sent to the
of our own country.
of
Does
our
yours, does yours say our own country?
of our country
Okay, go ahead.
and sent to the upper barbarians. I, Joseph, the son of Matthias, by birth an Hebrew, a priest also, and one who at first fought against the Romans myself, and was forced to be present at what was done afterwards, am the author of this work.
So he's telling you, these are the books. What he wrote it in Greek, and he sent it, when he says to the upper barbarians, I'm not sure what district that he's referring to. When he says barbarians at the time, Josephus, that refers to the barbarians during the time of the Romans, are talking about all non-Greek speaking cultures, not Latin. Latin was the language of the Romans, but it wasn't the language of educated people. So the Romans, although Latin was their tongue, they, along with the Greeks, considered all non-Greek speaking people barbarians. The Hebrews were considered barbarians because we didn't speak Greek. Those Greek-speaking Israelites were not considered barbarians. Paul wasn't considered a barbarian. He spoke Greek, right? And there were many people in Israel, we know this, that spoke Greek and Latin. And this is why Pontius Pilate had the sign put over Yahushua's crucifixion about the King of the Jews in Greek, Hebrew, and Latin. Go ahead, Art. Oh, is that the end of that? Number 2, I got it. It says, now at the time when this great concussion of affairs happened, the affairs of the Romans themselves were in great disorder. When it says this great concussion, it's talking about the clash between the civilization of the Jews and that of the Romans. That's the concussion that he's referring to, right? At the time when this great concussion of affairs happened, the affairs of the Romans themselves were in great disorder. It's talking about the constant going back and forth of the Roman, how can we put it, of the Roman emperors. I say going back and forth, but we're really talking about the constant conflict that the emperors and the Praetorian Guard and the various legatuses and their legions and the consuls, they're just constantly at war. It says, those Jews also who were for innovations then arose when the times were disturbed. They were also in a flourishing, listen to this, talking about the Israelites. They were also in a flourishing condition for strength and riches, insomuch that the affairs of the East were exceeding tumultuous, while some hoped for gain. Is talking about the Roman provinces of the East, Jerusalem, Babylon, Syria, Persia, while some hoped for gain, and others were afraid of loss in such troubles. For the Jews hoped that all of their nation, which were beyond the Euphrates, talking about the East, would have raised an insurrection together with them. This is what the people in Jerusalem was hoping, that all of our brothers from beyond the Euphrates, that means of Persia, Babylon, Media, that we would have raised up in one unison against the Romans. The Gauls also, meaning the people of Gaul, right? The region of that will be France and Belgium, Luxembourg, Switzerland, the western section of Holland, all of that is Gaul. He says the Gauls also in the neighborhood of the Romans were in motion. And the Celti, talking about the Celts, were not quiet, but all was in disorder after the death of Nero. So you see this. And the opportunity now offered indeed many to aim at the royal power. And the soldiery affected change. When it says the soldiery, we're talking about the different legions and the Praetorian Guard. And the soldiery affected change out of the hopes of getting money. I thought it therefore an absurd thing to see the truth falsified in the affairs of such great consequence, and to take no notice of it, but to suffer those Greeks and Romans that were not in the wars to be ignorant of these things, and to read either flatteries or fictions, while the Parthians and the Babylonians and the remotest Arabians and of those our nation beyond the Euphrates with the Adabini by my means knew accurately both when the war begun, what miseries it brought upon us, and after what manner it ended. In other words, he's telling you, all of these people, the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabians, the Babylonians, the people beyond the Euphrates, nobody had a true account of what really went down, but Josephus was able to give it. Go ahead, I'm gonna get to paragraph number 3.
It is true, these writers have the confidence to call their accounts histories, wherein yet they seem to me to fail of their own purpose, as well as to relate nothing that is sound.
That means all the things that the Greeks and the Romans and the Persians and all these other nations, they wouldn't rely, that when it says sound, it would be full of inaccuracies, their accounts. Go ahead.
For they have a mind to demonstrate the greatness of the Romans, while they still diminish and lessen the actions of the Jews, as not discerning how it cannot be that those must appear to be great who have only conquered those that were little.
Listen to what he's saying. This is what these other nations would do. They would try to aggrandize the Romans, and he's trying to let them know, you don't have, it's not necessary to take the Romans who were already great and try to make them greater by belittling or lessening the works of the people they conquered. And you're going to see his reasoning is, then that takes away from the true greatness of the Romans, and it does. For the Romans to have gone and conquered a bunch of nobodies, it doesn't say shit for their greatness. That's what he's saying. Says so. Josephus is basically criticizing the processes that the other historians exercised with the intention of aggrandizing the Romans at the cost of the history of the true event and how great the other peoples that the Romans conquered were. Go ahead, Ak.
Nor are they ashamed to overlook the length of the war, the multitude of the Roman forces who so greatly suffered in it, or the might of the commanders.
Right, he's saying these were the things that they would do. They would overlook all of the casualties that the Romans suffered. They would overlook the painstaking efforts that the Roman generals involved had to exhaust in order to execute this conquest of Jerusalem. Go ahead.
Whose great labors about Jerusalem will be deemed inglorious, if what they achieved be reckoned but a small matter.
Right. If what the Romans achieved in Jerusalem is considered a small matter, then he's letting you know that would really diminish the greatness of what it was to have defeated Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, brother, Jerusalem was an impenetrable force. You're gonna eventually we'll get to it, where the Titus Vespasian himself said, man, no man could have took down this country, this city. Say it was impenetrable, but they knew that they were conducted by the Heavenly Father. He said the heavens destroyed Jerusalem. We're going to eventually read that. Number 4, I got it. It says, however, I will not go to other extreme, meaning how, whereas the others were greatly exaggerating what the Romans were doing, right, by diminishing the people that were conquered by them, he's saying, I'm not going to go to the other extreme and say these nations were greater than they were. He's referring to Jerusalem. In other words, he's talking about just keeping a balance, just simply what happened, what took place, so that all readers can appreciate what took place. Y'all forgive me, man. However, I will not go to the other extreme out of opposition to those men who extol the Romans, nor will I determine to raise the actions of my countrymen too high. but I will prosecute the actions of both parties with accuracy. Yet shall I suit my language to the passions I am under, as to the affairs I describe. That means he's going to use the language necessary to help depict what took place, because he is involved. He's an objective writer, but having played a subjective part. This is what he's saying. Yet shall I suit my language to the passions I am under, as to the affairs I describe, and must be allowed to indulge some lamentations upon the miseries undergone by my own country. He's saying, I'm not going to keep my emotions out where the emotions of what my people went through are needed to be expressed. This is what he's saying. He's not going to be over intellectual about it. 4, listen to this. For that it was a seditious temper of our own that destroyed it. I'm going to read that from verse, yet shall I suit my language. I'm going to read it so you can see this. Yet shall I suit my language as to the passions I am under, as to the affairs I describe, and must be allowed to indulge some lamentations upon the miseries undergone by my own country. For that it was a seditious temper of our own that destroyed it. He's talking about this is what brought the destruction on Jerusalem, was a seditious distemper of us. And that they were the tyrants among the Jews who brought the Roman power upon us, who unwillingly attacked us, saying the Romans, when the Romans leveled Jerusalem, they didn't want to do it. It's talking about the Roman, what do we call it? The Roman, I'm trying to think of it, the Roman emperors and the generals involved. Where am I at? Okay. And that they were the Roman tyrants among the Jews who brought the Roman power upon us, who unwillingly attacked us and occasioned the burning of our holy temple. Titus Caesar, who destroyed it, is himself a witness, who during the entire war pitied the people who were kept under by the seditious, and did often voluntarily delay the taking of the city and allowed time to the siege in order to let the authors have opportunity for repentance. That means he was taking extra long to encircle the city. And let me say this, in order to have the people who were in charge have a change of heart, while others who wanted to leave, listen, and this is what Christ meant. Real quick, I want to interject this right here. I want to interject 2 places. First, Luke chapter 19 and verses 41 through 44. Now, this is Christ reflecting on what was coming by himself. And then in another one in chapter 21, he actually gives this a warning. Now, Christ spoke and lived, let's put it like this. By the time Christ ascended at 33 years into his life, right? Crucified, resurrected, and ascended. 37 years later, this is what we're reading about what took place 37 years after the ascension of Christ. So as I read Luke chapter 19 and verses 41 through 44.
Luke chapter 19 and verse 41. And when he was come near, he beheld the city and wept over it.
This is Christ on his own, making his last entrance into the city. And before he gets there, he looks over it and just starts crying because he knew what was going to take place. Go ahead.
Saying, if thou hast known, even thou, at least in this thy day, the things which belong unto thy peace. But now they are hid from thine eyes.
Go ahead.
For the day shall come upon thee, that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee round, and keep thee in on every side.
Now, this is what we read about. Titus was the one who was executing this, right? He's saying the days are going to come where they're going to entrench you about. Go ahead out.
Verse 44. and shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee. They shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation.
Right, they didn't recognize it. Now, another spot, go to chapter 21 and start off at verse 20. And this is Christ, what we just read, reflecting himself. It's as though he's speaking to the spirit of the city. The days are coming when you don't know that your peace is getting ready to get taken away. But this was because Israel was being run by tyrant priests, a tyrant high priest. And the Most High was done. The city was completely evil. Christ had came and spoke and did what he had to do in order to make that how do we say that remission, or that that atonement for the nation. Now the Most High was bringing the wrath. Go ahead, Ak.
Chapter 21, verse 20.
Go ahead.
And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out. And let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto.
So that means all the nations, talking about Israelites scattered in the nations, we weren't supposed to come back in. We were not supposed to come back in. Christ said, when you see these things happening, and we're reading here in the Josephus that Titus made it a point to take very long, to take his time in encompassing the city and to establishing all the things needed, all of the conditions needed for a siege. He was trying to give people time to get out. That was the Most High working on Titus to do that, giving people time to escape. Because once the siege was underway, forget it, it was horrible. We're going to read about it. It was merciless. And let me say this. You want to know, if you want to know what, not necessarily what comes close. I've ever only read one document that described only one other place, compared it to the fall of Jerusalem, and that was the fall of Tenochtitlan. That shit was horrible. Talking about Mexico City. It's the one place in history that was described as having suffered something as horrid as what Jerusalem suffered. And in modern times, just so that people have an idea of what a siege does, historians will often encourage you to read about the siege of Stalingrad, the siege of Leningrad, like World War II, World War I. Man, the levels of desperacy are incomprehensible. The levels of death, you can't see yourself looking at your children like lamb chops, but that's the first thing to go. It's people's pets, domestic animals, all the little creatures and rodents. Then they start turning themselves on their children and then on the weak. This is what happened. And let me say that, and this is the shit that's coming to America. This desperacy that's all over the world, this shit has come, the Most High is targeting the United States for this. This is judgment. So this is important that we come back to the Most High, like I've been saying for the longest. The only thing you can do to like people into prepping, the only thing that can be done to prep for what's coming is what we've been doing. However long you've been involved in this work, it's the only thing that can be done. What's coming for can't be prepared for. What the Most High is bringing can't be prepared for. I don't give a shit how much food people got, storage, utilities, and guns and gold, all that stuff out. The scriptures say they're gonna throw their gold and silver in the streets in the day of judgment.
Wow.
You can't eat fucking gold. You know what I mean? All these people thinking that the only thing, that's why it's called salvation. Because only the heavens can deliver us from what's coming. Okay, read on down, Amayetazah. Call your verse out.
I think you were still in chapter 4, paragraph 4.
I'm still in paragraph 4, but I wanted you to read. I wanted you to finish that in Luke 21 up until where it says they shall fall by the sword.
Okay. Luke chapter 20 and verse 21. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto.
So the Most High have what? Have Titus taken his time so that this warning could be heeded to. So that people that understood Christ had spoken of this could actually execute these orders and get out. And it got so bad that our tyrant leaders wouldn't let Israelite people leave. They were evil. They would kill them before you let them leave. Go ahead.
Verse 22. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that tie with child, and to them that give suck in those days. For there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled.
All right. Thank you. So now we're going back to paragraph 4 that I was reading. And I'm going to pick it up where it says Titus Caesar. Titus Caesar, who destroyed it, is himself a witness who, during the entire war, pitied the people who were kept under the seditious, and did often voluntarily delay the taking of the city and allow time to the siege in order to let the authors have opportunity for repentance. But if anyone makes an unjust accusation against us, when we speak so passionately about the tyrants, this is talking about people that criticize what Josephus says about his own leaders. When he says tyrants, he's talking about the high priest in charge of Jerusalem. But if anyone makes an unjust accusation against us, when we speak so passionately about the tyrants or the robbers, or sorely bewail the misfortunes of our country, let him indulge our affections herein, though it be contrary to the rules of writing history. He's saying he's going to be writing with the emotion of what was taking place, of the sorrow, of the misery. He's telling you right now that he's going to not so much adhere to the rules of writing history because he's an active participant. And so he's asking to be allowed to indulge in his emotions because this is his people that he's writing about. That's what he's saying. Because it had come, I'm going to read it from, but if anyone makes an unjust accusation against us, when we speak so passionately about the tyrants or the robbers, or sorely bewail the misfortunes of our country, let him indulge our affections herein, though it be contrary to the rules for writing history, because it had so come to pass that our city, Jerusalem, had arrived, listen to this, at a higher degree of felicity, meaning happiness, than any other city under the Roman government, and yet at last fell to the sorest calamities again. It's showing you at the height of the Roman Empire, Jerusalem was the place in all the Roman Empire where there was more prosperity than any other place, because all the Most High wanted us to do was serve the Romans and pay them tribute, and we could live like we wanted to. It just so happens is that we showed him that we wanted to live wickedly. This is how it was during the time of the Greeks. All of that Antiochus that got brought down on us was brought on us from an evil and a wickedness that we initiated. Reading on down. Accordingly, it appears to me that the misfortunes of all men from the beginning of the world, if they be compared to these of the Jews, are not so considerable as they were. What is he saying? He's saying from the time of Cain and Abel up until now, nothing had happened that was as severe as what was suffered by Jerusalem. That's the beginning of the world, right? While the authors of them were not, let me make sure accordingly, it appears to me that the misfortunes of all men from the beginning of the world, if they be compared to these of the Jews, are not so considerable as they were. While the authors of them, meaning the histories other than the Jerusalem, right, were not foreigners neither, This makes it impossible for me to contain my lamentations. When he says the authors of them, he's talking about the people who were responsible for the calamities. Authors, he's not talking about other writers. He's talking about the authors, meaning those who were responsible for bringing the wrath on Jerusalem. He's telling you they were not foreigners. Let me read that again. Accordingly, it appears to me that the misfortunes of all men from the beginning of the world, if they be compared to these of the Jews, were not so considerable as they were. While the authors of them, talking about the authors of these calamities, were not foreigners neither. This makes it impossible for me to contain my lamentations. But if anyone be inflexible in his censures of me, let him attribute the facts themselves to the historical part, and the lamentations to the writer himself only.
However, I may justly blame the learned men among the Greeks.
Now he's going to criticize the writings you'll see of the Greeks and others because of how they really did not deal accurately in their account. Go ahead, Ak.
However, I may justly blame the learned men among the Greeks, who when such great actions have been done in their own times, which upon the comparison quite eclipse the old worlds, do yet sit as judges of those affairs, and pass bitter censures upon the labors of the best writers of antiquity.
He's talking about when other people write about similar things that happened during the time of the Greeks are known to sit back and judge all the writers. In other words, the Greeks didn't like people telling accurate histories of themselves. The Greeks were known for glorifying their deeds and polishing shit up. Go ahead.
Which, although they may be superior to the old writers in eloquence,
it's talking about the ancient and the writers of the old times were better writers. Go ahead.
Yet are they inferior to them in the execution of what they intended to do.
That means they don't the Greeks don't exercise what? They don't execute the office of a historian like they're supposed to. Continue.
While these also
hold up. What'd you say, Dawiyad?
That'll make them liars, right? Liars?
Yeah, they're always, this is what he's telling you. They're always lying. Go ahead.
While these also write new histories about the Assyrians and Medes.
It's talking about the Greeks were altering and writing new histories of the Assyrians and Medes. Now, why is he taking up issue with this? Because the Greeks are newcomers, and they would go and take the old writings of the Assyrians and the Medes and what? And how do we put this? What do they call that? They would in a sense abridge them with their modern, through their modern writing. They didn't have the Greeks didn't have the knowledge of the old world, y'all. The Greeks got much of their knowledge of the old world from the Egyptians, who got much of their teaching from Abraham. Remember the Greeks, they went and conquered and put this big library in Egypt, and then they began, you can read about that in Antiquities of the Jews, about the section would be you can find from the death of Alexander. From the death of Alexander, the section of Antiquities of the Jews that is titled From the Death of Alexander. Two or three paragraphs down, they tell you about how the Greeks in Egypt began to assemble all the books and the histories, tens and twenties of thousands of books of all the nations of the old world. They were newcomers, so this is why Josephus is criticizing that. Go ahead. Amiyetazan.
While these also write new histories about the Assyrians and Medes, as if the ancient writers had not described their affairs as they ought to have done.
In other words, as if the Greeks were the person to come back and show the Medes didn't do their own history right. The Assyrians didn't do their own history right. This is the issue that Josephus takes up with them. Go ahead.
Although these be as far inferior to them in abilities as they are different in their notions from them.
Go ahead.
For of old, everyone took upon them to write what happened in his own time.
That's right, meaning the Assyrians wrote what happened in their time, the Medes what happened in their time. Go ahead.
Where their immediate concern in the actions made their promises of value, and where it must be reproachful to write lies, when they must be known by the readers to be such.
Go ahead.
But then an undertaking to preserve the memory of what had not been before recorded, and to represent the affairs of one's own time to those that come afterwards, is really worthy of praise and commendation.
He's speaking with respect to praise and commendation of each of those ancient civilizations having taken the effort to write for people for the time to come, for people in the future to know what happened. He's telling you that Josephus is letting you know that the Medes and that the Assyrians will be writing accurate stuff, and the Greeks will come back, write it, rewrite it, and lie about it. That's what he's telling you. Go ahead.
Now he is to be esteemed to have taken good pains in earnest, not who does not know more than change the not who does no more than change the disposition and order of other men's works, but he who not only relates what had not been related before, but composes an entire body of history of his own.
Go ahead.
Accordingly, I have been at great charges and have taken very great pains about this history, though I be a foreigner, and do dedicate this work as a memorial of great actions, both to the Greeks and to barbarians.
Meaning Greeks and non-speaking Greeks. Go ahead.
But for some of our own principal men, their mouths are wide open and their tongues loosed presently for gain and lawsuits, but quite muzzled up when they are to write history.
In other words, he's talking about when it comes time for money, when it comes time to be honored and given benefits, when he says their mouths are wide open, he means they're always ready to talk and give an account. But then when it's time to actually sit down and write a true history of what took place, he said they don't know nothing. Their mouths are shut. Talking about of his own people. Go ahead.
When they must speak truth and gather facts together with a great deal of pains. And so they leave the writing such histories to weaker people, and to such as are not acquainted with the actions of princes.
Go ahead.
Yet shall the real truth of historical facts be preferred by us, how much soever it be neglected among the Greek historians.
You hear that? So he's telling you the Greek historians have always neglected to tell the truth concerning other people's histories and including their own. He opened up the paragraph by telling you how their own history, they polish things up and make sure that things are always, presented to their liking. Okay, number 6. I'll read 6 and 7. It says to write concerning the antiquities of the Jews, who they were originally, and how they revolted from the Egyptians. This is going back to the time of Moses, right? And what country they traveled over, and what countries. Now, why is he saying this? Because he's already telling you what he done did. Antiquities of the Jews is the part before this. Remember, this is the preface to the wars of the Jews. So he's basically letting you know, okay, I've done with the antiquities of the Jews. I'm going to start all over. To write concerning the antiquities of the Jews, who they were originally, and how they revolted from the Egyptians, and what country they traveled over, and what countries they seized upon afterward, and how they were removed out of them, talking about exile from our countries. And I think this not to be a fit opportunity, and on other accounts, also superfluous. And this because many Jews before me have composed the histories of our ancestors very exactly. Josephus is letting you know he's not the first Israelite historian, and not the first to be very accurate either. He's talking about antiquities. As have some of the Greeks done it also. and have translated our histories into their own tongue, and have not much mistaken the truth in their histories. But then, were the writers of these affairs and our prophets leave off, then shall I take my rise and begin my history. That means he's saying, I'm writing with respect to the wars of the Jews, where the prophets left off and all the other historians, I'm going to pick up. And this is why we get wars of the Jews. Where am I at? But then, where the writers of these affairs and our prophets leave off, then shall I take my rise and begin my history. Now, as to what concerns that war which happened in my own time, I will go over it very largely, and with all the diligence I am able. But for what preceded mine own age, that I shall run over briefly. That means whatever happened in our history of the wars before he was born, he says he's going to deal with that briefly. He's telling us now how he's going to treat the rest of this work, which is wars of the Jews. Number 7, I'm going to read this also. For example, I shall relate how Antiochus, who was named Epiphanes, took Jerusalem by force and held it 3 years and 3 months, and was then ejected out of the country by the sons of Asamoneus. Asamoneus was the father of Mattathias, the father of Judas and Simon and all them cats, right? This was Judas's grandfather. Either that or after that, how their posterity quarreled about the government and brought upon their settlement the Romans and Pompey. How Herod also, the son of Antipater, remember I was saying this last week, Antipater was Herod's father, right? And then Herod would turn around and have sons and call them Antipas and Antipater as well. How Herod also, the son of Antipater, dissolved their government, talking about dissolved the government of the Hasmoneans, and brought Sosius upon them. And also how our people made a sedition upon Herod's death, while Augustus, the Roman emperor, while Augustus was the Roman emperor, and Quintilius Varus was in that country. And how the war broke out in the 12th year of Nero, with what happened to Cestius, and what places the Jews assaulted in a hostile manner in the first sallies of the war. He's telling us, for the most part, what the contents of wars of the Jews will be. Go ahead, Amiyatazar.
Paragraph 8. As also I shall relate how they built walls about the neighboring cities, and how Nero, upon Cestius's defeat, was in fear of the entire event of the war, and thereupon made Vespasian general in this war. And how this Vespasian, with the elder of his sons, made an expedition into the country of Judea. What was the number of the Roman army that he made use of, and how many of his auxiliaries were cut off in all Galilee, and how he took some of its cities entirely and by force, and others of them by treaty and on terms.
That means some of the cities got destroyed by force, and others were allowed to, talk about up in the north in Galilee. And others were, when it says terms, meaning they surrendered under agreeable terms to both parties, to the Romans and the Jews. Go ahead.
Now, when I am come so far, I shall describe the good order of the Romans in war, and the discipline of their legions, the amplitude of both the Galilees and its nature, and the limits of Judea.
Well, when it says both the Galilees, how Galilee was divided into two regions by the Romans during the course of history. Go ahead.
And besides this, I shall particularly go over what is peculiar to the country, the lakes and fountains that are in them, and what miseries happened to every city as they were taken. And all this with accuracy, as I saw the things done or suffered in them. I shall not conceal any of the calamities I myself endured, since I shall relate them to such as know the truth of them.
Go ahead, do number 9.
After this, I shall relate how when the Jews' affairs were become very bad, Nero died, and Vespasian, when he was going to attack Jerusalem, was called back to take the government upon him.
So this is how Vespasian became the emperor. He was in the process of taking Jerusalem, but once Nero died, he got called back. He became the emperor, and then his son Titus got left behind with a few other generals that executed the destruction. Go ahead.
What signs happened to him relating to his gaining that government, and what mutations of government then appeared at Rome, and how he was unwillingly made emperor by his soldiers, and how upon his departure to Egypt to take upon him the government of the empire, the affairs of the Jews became very tumultuous, as also how the tyrants rose up against them and fell into dissensions amongst themselves.
Talking about the tyrants rose up against the Romans and then was fighting against themselves, right? Number 10, I got it. Moreover, I shall relate how Titus marched out of Egypt into Judea the second time, as also how and where and how many forces he got together, and in what state the city was, by means of the seditions at his coming, by the seditious at his coming, meaning the condition of Jerusalem, what calamitous state we were in because of who was in charge of it. What attacks he made and how many ramparts he cast up, of the 3 walls that encompassed the city and of their measures, of the strength of the city and the structure of the temple and the holy house, the temple and holy house. And besides the measures of those edifices and of the altar, and all accurately determined. A description also of certain of their festivals and 7 purification days of purity, and the sacred ministrations of the priests with the garments of the priest and of the high priest, and of the nature of the most holy place of the temple, without concealing anything or adding anything to the known truth of things. Go ahead, I'm gonna get to number 11.
After this, I shall relate the barbarity of the tyrants towards the people of their own nation.
Talking about, once again, the Israelite leaders in charge and how barbarous they were against Israelites. Yes, Dawiya.
You always emphasize how Israel was just cruel to their own people. Right?
Yeah, man.
Israel being unjust and
with tyrants. Yeah, tyrants are, and this is why the Most High brought us down. Go ahead.
As well as the indulgence of the Romans in sparing foreigners, and how often Titus, out of his desire to preserve the city and the temple, invited the seditious to come to terms of accommodation.
Listen to that. Listen, the Romans did more to preserve the city, Amayatazah, than the people of Israel that were in charge. This is what he's letting us know. They tried to come to terms. They did not want to destroy this beautiful place. And like Josephus said earlier, we had lived the highest state of felicity of all the cities in the Roman Empire. Jerusalem was the place where most happiness could be found. Go ahead.
I shall also distinguish the sufferings of the people and their calamities, how far they were afflicted by the sedition, and how far by the famine, and at length were taken. Nor shall I omit to mention the misfortunes of the deserters, nor the punishments inflicted on the captives.
When it says the deserters, those Israelites trying to abandon and leave this miserable condition, the tyrants of Israel was, brother, torturing us. Go ahead.
As also how the temple was burnt against the consent of Caesar, and how many sacred things that had been laid up in the temple were snatched out of the fire. The destruction also of the entire city, with the signs and wonders that went before it.
Meaning the Most High had all of these omens that was showing us that this was the end and Israel couldn't see it. Go ahead.
And the taking the tyrants captive, and the multitude of those that were made slaves, and into what different misfortunes they were everyone distributed. Moreover, what the Romans did to the remains of the wall, and how they demolished the strongholds that were in the country, and how Titus went over the whole country and settled its affairs together with his return into Italy and his triumph.
His triumph was the parades that the Romans would have, to celebrate each Roman general after a great victory. They had these things called triumphs, right? Julius Caesar had his triumph when he defeated Vercingetorix of the Gauls. Then Mark Antony, let me see. It was Octavian who had his triumph. He brought back the bodies of Mark Antony and Cleopatra VII. And also Simon, I'm thinking of the high priest. This cat was, I think Titus took him back and had him, or either Vespasian, in his triumph also. Number 12, I have comprehended all these things in 7 books and have left no occasion for complaint or accusation to such as have been acquainted with this war. And I have written it down for the sake of those that love truth, but not for those that please themselves with fictitious relations. And I will begin my account of these things with what I call my first chapter. Now, y'all have to forgive me now. We're not going to read the entire Wars of the Jews. He has 7 books, and what we're going to do is make a project of reading it from book 6. So that's what you guys can do right now. You find book 6. I'm going to use the restroom on the exit. I'll be right back, y'all, and we'll get started.
Yeah. So it's a book 6 chapter. Page 33. Who's the first one? Who want to please take one? 5, 6, 4. Yes, 7. You want to go back to it? So 6. What did you say? Book one, what did you say? Book 2, yeah, 2. Yeah, I went from very great. I went from the point.
All righty. So book 6. Hold up. Right. Book 6 says, from the great extremity to which the Jews were reduced to the taking of Jerusalem by Titus. Deje el gato entrar. Okay, I'm a Yetazah. This has, let's see, chapter 1 has, y'all, it's a whole lot of reading. Let me get through it. Let me see. Chapter 1 has 8 large paragraphs. All right. So we'll divvy them up. I'm a Yatazah between the two of us. I'll start off, okay?
Okay.
Matter of fact, we're gonna get some of these brothers reading too. Dawiyah, you all right, man?
My voice. A little something.
Okay. Is everyone at book 6?
God, book 6.
Okay, I'm gonna get you guys reading as well. At least between you and Yetazai and myself. I don't know how well the other brothers read, but I want the whole Josephus is a challenging read, and so I want brothers that can read well. So I'll start off with yourself, okay? So I'm gonna do paragraph. Yetazai's gonna do a paragraph, and then you'll do a paragraph, and then be me again, all right?
Go.
So I'm doing paragraph 1. That the miseries of the Jews still grew worse, and how the Romans made an assault on the tower, upon the tower of Antonia. Thus did the miseries of Jerusalem grow worse and worse every day, and the seditious were still more irritated by the calamities they were under, even while the famine preyed upon themselves after it had preyed upon the people. And indeed, the multitude of carcasses that lie in heaps one upon another was a horrible sight, and produced a pestilential stench, which was a hindrance to those that would make sallies out of the city and fight the enemy. But as those were to go into battle array, who had been already used to 10,000 murders, must tread upon those dead bodies as they marched along. So were not they terrified, nor did they pity the men as they marched over them, nor did they deem this affront offered to the deceased to be any ill omen to themselves. But as they had the right hands already polluted with the murders of their own countrymen, it's talking about the people who are in charge of the city, brought the famine. And so as they go out to fight the Romans, they're desecrating and marching over millions of their own people, thousands of their own people who they were responsible for the death of. This is what it's saying, letting us know. But as they had their right hands already polluted with the murders of their own countrymen, and in that condition ran out to fight with foreigners. They seem to me to have cast a reproach upon the Most High himself, as if he were too slow in punishing them. This is what Josephus is like. Josephus was ready for these niggas that was in charge of the city to be dead, but to be killed by the Most High. For the war was not now gone on with as if, hold on, let me read this good. For the war was not now gone on with as if they had any hope of victory. For they gloried after a brutish manner in that despair of deliverance they were already in. And now the Romans, although they were greatly distressed in getting together their materials, raised their banks in 21 days, after they had cut down all the trees that were in the country that adjoined to the city, and that for 90 furlongs round about, as I have already related. And truly, the very view itself of the country was a melancholy thing. Melancholy meaning a very sad thing. For those places which were before adorned with trees and pleasant gardens were now become a desolate country every way, and its trees were all cut down. Nor could any foreigner that had formerly seen Judea and the most beautiful suburbs of the city, and now saw it as a desert, but lament and mourn sadly at so great a change. For the war had laid all signs of beauty quite waste, nor, if anyone that had known the place before had come on a sudden to it now, would he have known it again? Meaning, wouldn't he be able to recognize it? Someone who saw Jerusalem before the siege. But though he were at the city itself, yet would he have inquired for it notwithstanding. That means he could have been in the same place wondering, when are we getting to Jerusalem? Because it was a different looking place as a result of the siege and the death. Go ahead, Amiyatazar, number 2.
And now the banks were finished. They afforded a foundation for fear, both to the Romans and to the Jews. And for the Jews expected that the city would be taken, unless they could burn those banks, as did the Romans expect that, if these were once burnt down, they should never be able to take it. For there was a mighty scarcity of materials, and the bodies of the soldiers began to fail with such hard labors, as did their souls faint with so many instances of ill success. Nay, the very calamity.
About the Romans. The Romans was the Jews were exhausting the Romans in what was needed to build to be able to fight against us. And so the Roman soldiers was getting burnt out. They weren't worth their condition that they were in was not worth fighting. Go ahead, Art.
Nay, the very calamities themselves that were in the city proved a greater discouragement to the Romans than to those within the city. For they found the fighting men of the Jews to be not at all mollified among such their sore afflictions, while they had themselves perpetually less and less hopes of success, and their banks were forced to yield to the stratagems of the enemy, their engines to the firmness of their wall, and their closest fights to the boldness of their attack. And what was their greatest discouragement of all? They found the Jews' courageous souls to be superior to the multitude of the miseries they were under by their sedition, their famine, and the war itself.
This is showing you as screwed up and as hard as the conditions were, the Jews that were fighting was in excellent spirited condition, and the Romans was not used to this. The Romans was not used to this hardness. The Romans were not used to it being so hard to take a city, all the calamities that they had to deal with. And the Jews, in the midst of this calamity, they were in optimal spirits. So that's what was wearing down the Romans more so than the conditions, was the fact that the Jews, this was nothing to us. We was hard-ass people. Yes, Tazapah. Unmute yourself, bro.
I lost my place. Where we at?
We're in book 6. All right. We jumped from the preface to book 6 because we're not going to read all 7 books. And so now we're toward the end of the second paragraph of the first chapter of book 6.
Chapter 13.
Well,
You good?
I'm
All
good
right.
at the water.
All right. Go ahead, Amiyataza. Read that section again. I want you to read it from when it says, for there was a mighty scarcity of materials.
Where's that?
And just a little bit below just below the ending. Put where it says, for they found the fighting men. Do that. For there was a mighty scarcity of materials and the bodies of the soldiers.
That was 11.
11. Okay, thank you. Thank you. For there was a mighty scarcity of materials, and the bodies of the soldiers began to fail with such hard labors, as did their souls faint with so many instances of ill success.
That means what?
Nay.
When it says so many instances of ill success, remember, we haven't read, we skipped over books 1 through 5. So when you, and this is something you guys should do on your own, is you should take up this reading from where we left off at the preface so that you can see the Romans was getting their ass kicked by us, y'all. And so when it says ill success, they had so many attempts that was unsuccessful, that they were getting worn down by us. And all the machines that they had to build to be able to fight in this mountainous region, they call it, it's talking about their war engines. So they were being worn down physically by having to build all of these war engines, and they were being worn down morally, or as it says, their soul behind all of the what? All of the defeats that they were suffering. Go ahead, Amiyataza.
Nay, the very calamities themselves that were in the city proved a greater discouragement to the Romans than to those within the city.
Right, meaning the Romans were more discouraged than the people who were being sieged. And we just read, we were walking all over our dead bodies, but we weren't discouraged like the Romans. Go ahead.
For they found the fighting men of the Jews to be not at all mollified among such their sore afflictions, while they had themselves perpetually less and less hopes of success, and their banks were forced to yield to the stratagems of the enemy, their engines to the firmness of their wall, and their closest fights to the boldness of their attack.
Go ahead.
And what was their greatest discouragement of all? They found the Jews' courageous souls to be superior to the multitude of the miseries they were under by their sedition, the famine, and the war itself.
Damn, listen, you can say we were some hard-ass people. We were superior. Listen to what it said. It says that our souls were superior to the multitude of the miseries. You know why? Because we had just come from, we have been militarily occupied since the 5th century BC. That's why. Since the 6th century BC, you're talking about 500 years of having been militarily occupied, beginning with the Babylonians, then the Persians, then the Greeks, and now the Romans. Israel was used to war, huh? We was used to hardship. We was used to catching hell. And so while it says there was no hope of winning, our souls were still hardened in it. And that is what discouraged the Romans most, is that you couldn't break our spirit. Go ahead.
Insomuch that they were ready to imagine that the violence of their attacks was invincible, and that the alacrity they showed would not be discouraged by their calamities. For what would not those be able to bear if they should be fortunate, who turned their very misfortunes to the improvement of their valor?
That means everything we suffered, it made us more brave. Everything we suffered, it fed our courageousness. Go ahead.
These considerations made the Romans keep a stronger guard about their banks than they formerly had done.
They're like, these Israelites are no joke. Dawiyah, you got it?
Chapter
3.
Paragraph 3. But now John and his party took care for securing themselves afterward, even in case this wall should be thrown down, and fell to their work before the battering rams were brought against them. Yet not compass what they had endeavored to do. But as they were gone out of their torches, they came back under great discouragement before they came near to the banks. And the reasons were these, 17, that in the first place, their conduct did not seem to be unanimous, but they went out in distinct parties.
In distinct parties.
Distinct parties.
It's talking about we weren't unified in how we operated. We went out in distinct meaning different parties, and we performed different details. We wasn't organized and unified in our defense of the city. Go ahead.
And at distinct intervals, and after a slow manner, and timorously, and to say all in a word, without a Jewish courage. For they were now defective in what is peculiar to our nation, that is, in boldness, in violence of assault, and in running upon the enemy altogether, and in preserving in what they go about, though they do not at first succeed in it, but they now went out in a more languid manner than usual.
In other words, what he's just saying is that we normally would go out and we'd be violent, we'd be courageous, we'd be, effective and unified. Now, when it says languid, that languid is a derivative of languish. The term languish means to diminish in strength and vitality. So that means to go out against the Romans in a languid manner. That means we weren't going out as intense, we weren't as violent, we weren't as courageous. We were beginning to weaken and wear down. Go ahead.
And at the same time, found the Romans set in array, and more courageous than ordinary, and that they guarded their banks both with their bodies and their entire armor, and this to such a degree on all sides, that they left no room for the fire to get among them.
In other words, when it's talking about the banks, it's talking about all the barriers and protective elements of where the Romans were fighting from. The Israelites, we would try to go out and burn them. We try to go out and destroy the machines and the banks and the barriers that the Romans had made for their own defense, and we couldn't. In other words, you see the Romans now becoming more courageous and more bold, and the attempts of the Israelites beginning to languish and be not as effective, is what it's saying. Go ahead.
And that every one of their souls was such good courage that they would sooner die than desert their ranks. For besides their notion that all their hopes were cut off in case their works were once burnt, the soldiers were greatly ashamed, and subtly should be quite too hard for courage, madness for armor, multitude for skill, and Jews for Romans.
Go ahead.
Romans had now also another advantage, in that their engines for sieges cooperated with them in throwing darts and stones as far as the Jews when they were coming out of the city, whereby the man that fell became an impediment to him that was next to him, as did the danger of going farther make less zealous in their attempts.
Talking about the Roman towers, the Roman engines that they were basically attacking us from were far more effective now and created more hardship for Israel. That means if you went out in a group of 5 or 10 or 20 and a couple of you fell, the people that fell became a burden to the people that still had to move. Go ahead.
And for those that had run under the darts, some of them were terrified by the good order and closeness of the enemy's ranks, before they came to a close fight, and others were pricked with their spears and turned back again.
That means they would come out, the Romans would throw a spear, they'd get caught, the Jew would run back. These were these big engines that the Romans were able to construct over these years of the siege, and now they were employing them. Go ahead.
At length, they reproached one another for their cowardice and retired without doing anything.
Go ahead.
This attack was made upon the first day of the month, Pentemus, Tammuz in parentheses. So when the Jews were retreated, the Romans brought their engines, although they had all the wild stones thrown at them from the tower of Antonia, and were assaulted by fire and sword, and by all sorts of darts, with necessity afforded the Jews to make use of. For although these had great dependence on their own wall, and a contempt of the Romans' engines, yet did they endeavor to hinder the Romans for bringing them.
From bringing them. That means their work was so that the Romans couldn't, do this. Look up an image. I want you to put up the image of Roman siege engine. A Roman siege engine. And you'll see they were like towers that could be moved, right? The Israelite strategy became trying to not allow the Romans to arrive with their siege engines. Continue, Dawiyah.
Now these Romans struggled hard, on the contrary, to bring them, as deeming that this zeal of the Jews was in order to avoid any impression to be made on the tower of Antonia, because its wall was but weak and its foundations rotten. However, that tower did not yield to the blows given it from the engines.
There you go. Go ahead.
Yet did the Romans bear the impressions made by the enemy's darts, which were perpetually cast at them, and did not give way any of those dangers that came upon them from above. And so they brought their engines to bear. But then, as they were beneath the other, and were sadly wounded by the stones thrown down upon them, some of them threw their shields over their bodies, and partly with their hands, and partly with their bodies, and partly with crows. They undermined its foundations.
Okay, hold up right there, Dawiyah. I want y'all to take a look at the images that Amayetazar is putting. Now, Amayetazar, the one to the second to the left that has the little red square around it. If you could put that one up. Right, let me see. Or actually the one that's next to it, actually, the one that is against the wall, that where you see the smoke and all of that stuff coming from. Can you highlight that and make that on the big screen? This is what, yeah, that's good, but I want the other one now. The one, not the one to the right of it. The one that has the image of the towers against the walls, and you see the walls, some of the smoke rising and stuff. Right, that one right there. This is what the Romans was building on, and then they had to drag those. Thank you. The siege engine. There you go. They had to drag those. This is what Josephus is describing the Jews trying to burn. Okay, Dawiyah, pick up where you left off. Thank you, Amayetazar. Pick up where you left off.
And with great pains, they removed 4 of its stones. Then night came upon both sides and put an end to the struggle for the present. However, that night, the wall was so shaken by the battering rams in that place where John had used his stratagem before, and undermined their banks, that the ground then gave way, and the wall fell down suddenly.
All righty. So this is talking about, I believe one guy, one of the tyrants' name is John. And then later on, you'll also hear about Simon. These are the cats that were holding out against the Romans and were killing Israelites and were responsible for the calamity that had been brought upon the city. Okay, I'm going to read paragraph number 4. Let me see where we are. I'll read paragraph number 4. And then also, I guess I'm going to read 5, but 4 is very brief. Okay, we'll start cutting some of these in half. I'll read 4 and then take on into 5. I'm a Yetzizah, and then I'll let you know when to take over halfway through 5. Okay. When this accident had unexpectedly happened, the minds of both parties were variously affected. For though one would expect that the Jews would be discouraged because this fall of their wall was unexpected by them, and they had made no provision in that case, yet did they pull up their courage because the tower of Antonia itself was still standing, as was the unexpected joy of the Romans at this fall of the wall, soon quenched by the sight they had of another wall, which John and his party had built within it. That means the Romans was cheering when the wall fell, and then once the smoke settled, they saw another wall that John and the Israelites had built on the inside, because they expected that outside was going, take batteries, taking the battering rams, and so it fell only to see, damn, another wall. All right. However, the attack of this second wall appeared to be easier than that of the former, because it seemed a thing of greater facility to get up to it through the parts of the former wall that were now thrown down. This new wall appeared also to be much weaker than the Tower of Antonia, and accordingly, the Romans imagined that it had been erected so much on the sudden, meaning, very quickly, that they should soon overthrow it. Yet did not anybody venture now to go up to this wall, for that such as first ventured to do must certainly be killed. That means the Romans was like, well, they didn't want to run up on that new wall, although that wall was put up hastily and therefore weaker and therefore easier to tear down. Whoever got close to it was more subject to being killed. That's what they're saying. I'm going to start off at number 5. And now Titus, upon consideration that the alacrity of soldiers in war is chiefly excited by hopes of good words, and that exhortations and promises do frequently make men to forget the hazards they run, nay, and sometimes to despise death itself, got together the most courageous part of his army, and tried what he could do with his men by these methods, meaning to inspire them, to call the strongest of the men, and like you be seeing on all the movies, Braveheart and Patriot and everybody else, right? Damn Leonidas Spartans, and giving people these, giving the soldiers these exhortations, meaning these speeches to go out there and fire them up. This is what Titus decided to do. "O fellow soldiers," said he, "to make an exhortation to men to do what hath no peril in it is on that very account inglorious to such to whom that exhortation is made." He's basically saying to give a speech of exhortation under circumstances where there's no danger, then that's inglorious to do. He's recognizing the exhortation to them is needed because of the dangers, what he's saying. And indeed, so it is in him that makes the exhortation an argument of his own cowardice also. I therefore think that such exhortations ought then only to be made use of when affairs are in a dangerous condition, and yet are worthy of being attempted by everyone themselves. Accordingly, I am fully of the same opinions with you, that it is a difficult task to go up this wall. And this is what Titus is telling them. But that it is proper for those that desire reputation for their valor to struggle with difficulties in such cases. Will then appear when I have particularly shown that it is a brave thing to die with glory, and that the courage here necessary shall not go unrewarded in those that first began the attempt. And let my first argument to move you to it be taken from what probably some would think reasonable to discuss to dissuade you. I mean, the constancy and patience of the Jews, even under their ill success, for it is unbecoming you who are Romans and my soldiers who have in peace been taught how to make wars, and who have also been used to conquer in those wars, to be inferior to Jews, either in action of the hand or in courage of the soul. And this especially when you are at the conclusion of your victory and are assisted by God himself. For as to our misfortunes, they have been owing to the madness of the Jews, while their sufferings have been owing to your valor and to the assistance of the Most High, and to the assistance the Most High hath afforded you. For as to the seditions they have been in, and the famine they are under, and the siege they now endure, and the fall of their walls without our engines, what can they all be? What can they all be but demonstrations of the Most High's anger against them? This is the Romans saying about Israel. Titus is firing up his people and saying God is against them. That's why their wall fell in the middle of the night. He's punishing them. And listen, and he was right.
Yeah.
The Most High was against us, and the Most High did have the wall fall in the middle of the night. All the batterings of the Romans couldn't do it during the day, and then all of a sudden in the nighttime, the wall falls. So he's calling these things to their attention to incite them to courage. Let me see. Right. What can they all but demonstrate? What can they all be but demonstrations of the Most High's anger against them and of his assistance afforded us? It will not therefore be proper for you either to show yourselves inferior to those to whom you are really superior, or to betray that divine assistance which is afforded you. He's like, you gotta go up, you have to endanger yourself. You have to go ahead and confront this peril, because number one, you're superior to them, and number two, you got divine assistance. Right? And indeed, how can it be esteemed otherwise than a base and an unworthy thing, that while the Jews who need not much be ashamed if they be deserted, because they have long learned to be slaves to others. See that? I just got through saying that. The Romans knew our history. They said, they are accustomed to being slaves. They've been slaves, he's telling you, for 600 years now. You better go in there and whoop up on their asses. He said, you're soldiers, you're bred into soldiers, and these people have been slaves for 600, and we have been, We've been slaves since the time of the Assyrians and the Babylonians. Let me read that again. How can it be esteemed otherwise than a base and unworthy thing, that while the Jews, who need not to be much ashamed if they be deserted, because they have long learned to be slaves to others, do yet despise death, that they may be so no longer, and do make sallies into the very midst of us frequently. Meaning when it says sallies, it's talking about little quick hits, like guerrilla warfare, just going out and trying to catch the Romans in unawares, doing some attacks and then getting back. He's saying they can do that Because why? They're ready to die so that they don't be a slave no more. And do make sallies into the very midst of us frequently, not in hopes of conquering us, but merely for a demonstration of their courage. We who have gotten possession of almost all the world, listen to what he's talking about the Romans, right? That belongs to either land or sea, to whom it will be a great shame if we do not conquer them. Do not once undertake any attempt against our enemies, wherein there is much danger. That means we have to go out and do this, even though it's dangerous. But sit still idle with such brave arms as we have, and only wait till the famine and fortune do our business themselves. He's basically telling them that they can't sit back and just try to wait till the famine does the fortune for them. That the Jews die off in the famine of the siege. He said, we have to go now and use our courage. This is what he's telling them. These were some cold soldiers back then. I'm gonna read it again. To whom it will be a great shame if we do not conquer them. Do not once undertake any attempt against our enemies wherein there is much danger, but sit still idle with such brave arms as we have, and only wait till the famine and fortune do our business themselves. And this when we have it in our power, with some small hazard, to gain all that we desire. For if we go up to this tower of Antonia, we gain the city. For if there should be any more occasion for fighting against those within the city, which I do not suppose there will, since we shall then be upon the top of the hill, and will be upon our enemies before they can have taken breath, these advantages promise us no less than a certain and sudden victory. Go ahead, Amayetis, I'll take it from there. As for myself,
I shall at present waive any commendations of those who die in war, and omit to speak of the immortality of those men who were slain in the midst of their martial bravery. Yet cannot I forbear to imprecate upon those who are of a contrary disposition, that they may die in time of peace, by some distemper or other, since their souls are already condemned to the grave, together with their bodies. For what man of virtue is there who does not know that those souls which are severed from their fleshly bodies in battles by the sword are received by the ether, that purest of elements, and joined to that company which are placed among the stars?
In other words, he's talking about the Romans and what their concept of what happens once you die in battle. You'll hear in various Roman movies, people talking of the Roman generals exhorting their men to die and be taken off to Elysium and places like that. Go ahead.
That they become good demons and propitious heroes, and show themselves as such to their posterity afterwards. While upon those souls that wear away in and with their distempered bodies comes a subterranean night to dissolve them to nothing, and a deep oblivion to take away all the remembrance of them. And this, notwithstanding, they be clean from all spots and defilements of this world. So that in this case, the soul at the same time comes to the utmost bounds of its life and of its body and of its memorial also. But since fate have determined that death is to come of necessity upon all men, a sword is a better instrument for that purpose than any disease whatsoever.
Right, so he's basically letting them know they could die They've given them the benefits of dying in battle, and that since all men die, are slated to die anyway, it's better to die by the sword than to die in a time of peace by some disease or just withering away. That's what he's saying. Go ahead, Art.
Why is it not then a very mean thing for us not to yield up that to the public benefit, which we must yield up to fate? And this discourse have I made upon the supposition that those who at first attempt to go upon this wall must needs be killed in the attempt, though still men of true courage have a chance to escape even in the most hazardous undertakings. For in the first place, that part of the former wall that is thrown down is easily to be ascended.
Right, it's
And for the
easy to climb. Go ahead.
And for the new built wall, it is easily destroyed. Do you therefore, many of you, pull up your courage and set about this work, and do you mutually encourage and assist one another?
Right.
And this your bravery will soon break the hearts of your enemies.
Right. He's saying you got to do this. This is what's going to break their spirit. When he says break their heart, he ain't talking about breaking somebody's heart like a broken heart romance. He's talking about breaking the spirit of the enemy, meaning breaking us. Go ahead.
And perhaps such a glorious undertaking as yours is may be accomplished without bloodshed. For although it be justly to be supposed that the Jews will try to hinder you at your first beginning to go up to them, yet when you have once concealed yourselves from them and driven them away by force, they will not be able to sustain your efforts against them any longer, though but a few of you prevent them and get over the wall. As for that person who first mounts the wall, I should blush for shame if I did not make him to be envied of others by those rewards I would bestow upon him.
Check that out. He's basically saying now, whoever's the first to breach that wall, I'm gonna make others to blush by how I'm gonna reward this dude. So he's firing them up, but now he's making sure what? He's giving them the incentive to go and do it with the intention of succeeding. Go ahead.
If such a one escape with his life, he shall have the command of others that are now but his equals.
That means the people that whoever breaches this new wall, if he survives it, he's going to no longer be one of his peer. He's going to be what? He's going to become a commander of men that right now he's equal to. Go ahead. This is aside from making the dude rich. Go ahead.
Although it be true also that the greatest rewards will accrue to such as die in the attempt.
Okay, so we'll stop it right there. Next week, you guys, we're going to pick up at this 6th paragraph, all right? At this 6th paragraph. And let me say this. This is why you guys got to make it your life habit to just read it. These are your history. And Josephus is one of these books. The type of writing is such that you really do, like even like how Amayetesai and myself are reading, we're really reading too fast, right? Josephus, the way he writes, he'll have how would most people express the idea or the point that most people would express in a very small sentence, not even being qualified or characterized as a paragraph. Josephus literally be expressing one point in one long paragraph. He just uses endless punctuation and constant adjectivation, meaning he's constantly, I say adjectivation, meaning he's constantly describing adjectives. He's constantly using adjectives to continue to unfold the point that he's making. So it's not an easy read, but neither is it very difficult. It's one of those readings that you're actually supposed to sit back and read this in silence. Amayetesai, what do you have to say about this reading? You know that, right? That this is one of those readings. I'm talking about the type of text that Josephus is. It's really supposed to be read. It's a study. It's not designed to be read and communicated like we're using it. No. This is supposed to be in someone's study, you know, at the end of the day, and it's all silent, and they're just going to say, okay, today I'm going to check out and see what paragraph 5 has to offer. And then that's it, because that's what it requires. What do you think, Yetazar?
Yeah. I've never read so much of the Josephus.
Yeah. Listen, go ahead.
This is good. Like it's definitely as you said, an exhaustive read that you've got to do it in the form of a study because it contains so much information as well.
Right. Like if you were going to use it like a lesson, then really, now the reason why I'm saying that is because the reason we're reading it is because, like I said, the truth of the matter is the last verse of Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, the answer to that in full, in its entirety, is from what we read, the preface of Wars of the Jews, all the way to the end. That's it. That's what it is. I'm just telling you, that's what that, matter of fact, let's finish up on Daniel chapter 9 and verse 27. Read that again, Yetazar.
Daniel chapter 9 and verse 27. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall
now
make
stop.
it.
The overspreading of abominations is talking about for all the evil that the people in charge of Jerusalem was doing. This is what brought the wrath down. Go ahead. And for the overspreading of the abominations,
he shall make it desolate.
He shall make it desolate. That means the city of Jerusalem shall be destroyed. Go ahead. I'm coming to you, Tazapah.
Even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate.
Right, and that, in other words, all of that, what that verse is saying is literally encompassed in what is Wars of the Jews from the preface all the way to the end of the 7th book and the final paragraph of the final chapter of the 7th book. Tazapah, go ahead and unmute yourself, brother.
No, like I was just gonna say that the Josephus helps us bridge the gaps in between the book of the Bible and really points out how the Bible is a history book.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's what I'm really enjoying from the reading. I also wanted you to check this out. If you have Netflix, they have a series that they did called the Ottoman Empire.
Is it talking about Mehmet, the youngest cat that took down Constantinople?
Yes, it is. And what reminded me of that is when we're reading in the Josephus, I forget the paragraph that we're in, but it talked about how they broke down the wall and it was another wall because Constantinople had like 4 walls.
Yeah, man. And eventually the cannons, Mehmet's cannons, but one of the Jews, a small portal, a traitor let the enemy in. I'm gonna check it out.
Check it out.
I'll get Netflix first, but those are always the more interesting things to watch. Those different type of documentaries and stuff, Thank you.
Con, like I think you enjoyed that one.
Yeah, I believe I will. Like I said, I love that. Matter of fact, let me go and see what a brother got to do to get Netflix. So yeah, the reason why I'm saying this is so that you guys can bear with me, and Yetazar and whoever else like Dawiyah that's reading, because this is really not the circumstance under which a text like Josephus can really be understood. It's one of those things where you really do have to sit back and read it in silence. And even now, to have gone from the preface to have passed books 1 through 5 and gotten to and picked up at book 6 is a great disservice. Believe me, like what Tazapah was saying, is that you really get a sense and filling up the missing spots and stuff like that, well, then you lose that sense if you really don't read the whole book. But are we going to sit here on every Friday and go and just read the Josephus from beginning of Wars of the Jews, book 1 of Wars of the Jews, all the way to book 7? No, we're not. You guys have to do that. You guys have to do that. But I'm trying to get us. I wanted to read book 7 only, but book 7 already deals with Jerusalem having already been destroyed. So I want to read what led up to the final destruction of Jerusalem, and that's actually book 6. Excuse me, y'all, for all of this coughing. I'm not sick per se. I'm in the phase of recovering, and for each time that I've caught this illness or the variant of this illness that I've caught 3 times now since September of 2019, and then last year September also, and now this is my 3rd time. It always takes a long time for my lungs to recover for some odd reason. The phlegm, it takes me a long time, my body a long time to finally get rid of the phlegm. And to me, this is such a disturbance to the classes and the fluidity of the reading and all of that, man. And just to have an archive where you got to listen to some nigga coughing and hacking, it's such a molestia to me. But forgive me, because I don't want to say, hey, okay, let me recover and then I'll be back on Fridays. Because this is what helps me recover, is talking and reading and screaming and stuff. So you guys, I'm gonna say shalom to you, and y'all have a good Sabbath class, Sabbath service tomorrow. I'm a Yetazan and myself. We're going to be involved in our Sabbath service with another congregation, and so we'll see you brothers and sisters on next Friday. All right.
Shalom.
All right. Shalom, brothers.
Shalom.